into her room, on the floor of her room, where she started screaming because she saw fire. And so I built the house of cards, and I started the incantation. And it went, I call in the heart of darkness, I call in the deepest evil that I know, I call in the depths of evil, to burn, burn, burn. And then they went to commercial. As you know, the commercials were fed right into the tape. In other words, we taped up to commercials and they put the commercials on. They did no editing. So we sat there and waited until the commercials went by. Well, the prop man was worried about whether or not the house of cards would burn, because when we came out of the commercial, I had a match and I lit the house of cards so that the fire superimposed upon her bedroom would start. And he came over with a lot of lighter fluid and he sprinkled it all over the house of cards so that it would burn well. So then we went to another commercial, and he began to get kind of worried over whether or not it was, the lighter fluid was right and it might not burn well. So he came over and he sprinkled some more lighter fluid. So then I'm sitting there, and they come back to me, and they cue me, and I start. I call in the house of darkness, I call in the depths of evil, and burn, burn, burn. And I lit it, and it went poof! Took off my eyelashes, took off my eyebrows, took off the front of my hair. But the back part was completely burned up in 2 seconds. So I'm going, deep in the heart of evil, there is a fire, and I call on you to burn, burn. Meanwhile, Victoria is screaming her head off, and there's nothing there. She's going, ah! And I'm picking up the ashes like this, and going, burn, burn. Just one of the great days of
and I've had no camera experience whatsoever. I've done a lot of theater, but I had no camera experience. So that very first day, this is the thing about Dark Shadows, that there were just so many firsts that came with that show. And that first day was absolutely terrifying. We had a week of rehearsal, and this was a brand new show. But when that red light went on, it just takes your breath away, and that's when you just call on every instinct you have, every bit of training you have, because you just have to go forward. And this was all live, as Laura says, there was no editing. So that red light went on, and it was the most terrifying thing. It was like a dragon looking at you. So I remember saying, God, you just let me through this, I'll never act again. I wrote that one. But there were so many firsts, because it was also a show that was done live, but most of the other daytime shows, it was people sitting at coffee tables, and talking about,
divorces,
whatever.
Fairs.
But we were actually doing a show that required special effects. And
adapting.
And we did chroma key for the first time, the blue screen. We did all kinds of special effects, and very often, as the show got more complicated, we would skip over the dialogue and they would practice the gags, as they called them. Mm-hmm. So the actors had very little time to actually rehearse the show, and we were really flying by the seat of our pants. Luckily, for some of the young ones like myself, I was 19, 20 years old, and you learn lines very quickly, you adapt very quickly. But for people like Sayer David, Joan Bennett, Grayson Hall, some of the veteran actors, we never use the word old, some of the veteran actors, they came from movie star backgrounds. And for them to adapt to learning that much dialogue and having no rehearsal time and essentially doing something live was incredibly difficult.
It was very difficult for Joan Bennett because she was used to being able to stop, to cut and start over, which is the way you shoot film, as you know. If you make a mistake, you stop and they start over, which we never did. So
it was an exciting thing, because as I was saying to somebody who came by the table earlier today, You know, when I was in drama school, we were doing Restoration comedy, Sheridan and Moliere. We were doing Shakespeare and Ibsen and Chekhov. You never think you're going to actually have a chance to do that. But then the very first job that I got was on Dark Shadows, where I drew on all of those things. Ours was a costume drama in very short order. So it was really exciting to put some of that stuff that I had just learned a year or so earlier into practice.
The genius behind the show, of course, is Dan Curtis.
Yes.
By the way, Dan Curtis is gone now. He died in 2006 at the age of 78. But Dark Shadows, of course, was the beginning, and he would go on to do Kolchak, The Night Stalker, and countless TV shows of a fantasy, horror, sci-fi nature that are still very coveted and collectible today. So I would like each of you, starting with you, Catherine, to talk about the Dan Curtis that each of you knew.
Well, for me, Dan Curtis was the major catalyst in my life. I just adored the man. I think we had everybody had a marvelous relationship with him in one way or the other. I just felt that I had a really special relationship with him. He gave me my first real job. The very first time I worked in England, it was for him doing a movie of the week it was Turn of the Screw for CBS. First time I worked in Hollywood, it was a movie of the week with Dan Curtis directing. And it's really because of Dan Curtis that I started my publishing company and wrote my first book. So he's been a catalyst throughout my adult life, and I'm very grateful that I had some time with him right before he died, to just sit with him quietly in the garden and page through some of the books that I had published, and the tribute book that Jim Pearson put together. And just going through, and even though he'd had a stroke and he's not able to speak, just to have that time with him. He meant a great deal to me. He was a big bear lion of a man. I don't know if it's metaphor, but he was Leo the lion, big, broad-shouldered, tough kind of a guy. It was very much sentimental as well, and many of his movies that we drew on his own childhood. He was a marvelous man.
Well, I had kind of the opposite relationship with him. I stayed as far away from him as possible. He was a little too much for me. He was, as she said, he was a bear of a lion of a man. Gruff and irritable and difficult, marvelously talented, but he just scared the out of me, and I don't know, I guess I was afraid of him, so, but he did give me a wonderful part, and every once in a while he'd say something nice to me, and of course those little nice things he said to me I'll treasure till I die, because he was hard to please. He was gruff and hard of hearing in later life. So if you didn't speak up, he got angry with you. But I have great admiration for him, and I think Winds of War and War and Remembrance are two of the most beautiful films I have ever seen. He was incredibly talented, tremendous amount of courage, great vision, and not afraid of doing anything. In fact, when he started directing the first Dark Shadows movie, he didn't even know you were supposed to say action. He said, okay, is everybody ready? Okay, okay, go. And that's where he began, and he wanted to direct so badly that he started directing on our show, and directed. Did he ever direct you on Dark Shadows?
Yes.
Yeah. But marvelous guy.
Clara, I wanted to ask, I've read that when the show started, it had a gothic flavor, and the mansion was haunted, but the idea of the vampire hadn't quite come in yet. But the vampire idea was introduced when the ratings began to slide a little bit, and they felt maybe the show needed a little extra.
Well, I think his daughter said to him, well, you probably know better.
Yeah, actually, this was before you were on the show. It wasn't Jonathan on. Jonathan was on first. When we first started the show, it was really a bodice ripper, to use that expression for just a romance, gothic romance. And in the beginning, it was the rich family up on the hill, and I was the kid from the wrong side of the tracks working at the diner. And there came a day, though, when we had a little girl on the show, and she was bouncing a ball. Right before that, there had been Frank Schofield, who was playing a sea captain, and he came up from, he was supposedly dead, and he appeared dripping wet with seaweed.